4-stroke versus 2-stroke, which is the best? Now, this is a question that I've started to ask myself for a very long time now. For my whole riding life, I've only ridden 2-strokes. That is mainly because they're cheap to buy and easy to maintain. But recently I bought my first 4-stroke bike ever, a brand new Husqvarna FE450 from 2020. And ever since then I've started thinking which of the 4-stroke bikes or the 2-stroke bikes are the best bikes. And that is exactly what we're going to figure out in today's video. In today's video we're going to do a comparison of the 300cc 2-stroke Supermoto versus the 450 4-stroke Supermoto. We're going to do drag races, sound comparisons, and we're also going to talk about the pros and cons of a 2-stroke bike versus a 4-stroke bike. I'm super excited to finally figure out which bike is the best, so with this said, let's begin the video. Okay, so I did recently record a video with the 300cc 2-stroke. In that video we rebuilt this bike into a Supermoto from a enduro bike. In that video we did a drag race and tested out the bikes shortly, but in today's video we're going to do a more in-depth video with the 450 versus the 300cc 2-stroke. Okay, so as usual we're going to begin the video by doing a sound comparison of the 2-stroke versus the 4-stroke. I already know that the 2-stroke is gonna sound a lot better, but yeah, still. Then after that we're going to do a drag race. Now this time I have brought my 360 camera with me so we can get some cool angles whilst we're doing the drag race. But with this said, let's begin with the sound check. Alright, so now we got the 360 camera for the GTA 5 angle. I think it's gonna look really sick during the drag race. Both me and him are not so good at drag races, but we're gonna see how it goes. Now in theory this should be pretty similar, but you never know. Alright, so I think that was pretty similar, but we're gonna do it a couple of more times to see if we can get a better start. After we've done a couple of more drag races, we're gonna do some flybys as well to hear incredible sound of these bikes. Okay, so I feel like that in the beginning of the drag race I have the advantage. I don't know if it's because of the 4-stroke or if it's because I have done more drag races than him, but we're gonna do it another time to see if we can get another result. Okay, so now we're going to do 0 to 100 on both the bike. We're gonna begin at my 450. Sadly, my speedometer doesn't work, so we're gonna use a app, but that's just gonna be better as well. So let's do the 0 to 100. So we got the speedometer app right there. Hopefully my phone doesn't fly away when I'm doing it, but yeah, we're gonna see. I don't know how accurate that was, but I think that every couple of seconds the speedometer updates, so we're just gonna have to compare it and yeah, hopefully it will work. So let's hop on the 300cc and do the 0 to 100. Alright, so let's go. This bike felt so much better doing the drag race. I am a lot more used to slipping the clutch on a 2-stroke, or at least I think I am, because on my 125cc, when I for example did a scrape and went down with the front wheel and I had to save the wheelie, I always slipped with my clutch to get that extra power on the lower RPMs to still do the wheelie. Okay, now so the next thing that we're gonna do is flybys. So let's begin with the 2-stroke. Alright, so it's now the next day, and now we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the 300cc 2-stroke versus the 450 4-stroke. I have a lot of things that I need to talk about, and maybe at the end we can figure out which bike is the best for you. So with this said, let's hop on the bike and begin. Alright, so let's begin with the pros of the 300cc. The first pro of the 300cc is that they're super easy to maintain. A piston change on a 300cc 2-stroke isn't hard at all. All you have to do is watch like a couple of YouTube videos and then you know how to change your piston. Compared to a 450 where you have to do so much more to change the piston. Second advantage is that a piston change of a 2-stroke is nothing compared to a 4-stroke. Changing a piston on a 2-stroke can cost, well, 200 to 300 euro, but on a 4-stroke it can cost from 500 euro to 1000 euros. It can be crazy on a 4-stroke. Now a 300cc 2-stroke is not only cheaper to maintain, but they're also cheaper to buy. In general, a 4-stroke enduro bike is also more expensive than a 300cc Supermoto, and in the long term it's also cheaper to own a 2-stroke than a 4-stroke. The next thing might be a personal thing, but that is that a 2-stroke sounds so much better than a 4-stroke. I mean, nothing beats the sound of a screaming 2-stroke. My opinion is that a 300cc or a 250 2-stroke sounds like lightning when you're behind the exhaust. But I also think that the 125cc's and lower sounds a lot better on the 2-stroke than the 250s and 300s because they have the power band. The 125cc's and lower also have a different shaped exhaust. That shape of the exhaust when it goes down and to the side means that you have a power band. And that also means that the sound is a lot better in my opinion. Compared to a 250 or a 300cc where the exhaust goes to the side. When the exhaust goes to the side, that means that you get more power on the bottom end. The next pro about the 300cc may also be a personal opinion. A 2-stroke bike is so much more fun to just ride around on the streets and just go full throttle, you know, accelerate, slow down, accelerate, pop a wheelie. It's so much more nice than a 4-stroke. So there are a lot of pros with the 300cc, but there are also a lot of cons that we're gonna talk about now. The first con of the 300cc 2-stroke is that they are not as reliable as a 4-stroke. A 2-stroke bike has a lot higher risk of seizing the piston, but as mentioned before, doing a piston change isn't super hard. The only annoying thing is that if the piston scatters and gets in the crankshaft, because then you have to split the engine and remove the pieces and maybe get a new crankshaft. But I've done it and it wasn't super hard, but it was really annoying. Alright, so another con about the 300cc 2-stroke is highways. Riding a 300cc or a 2-stroke in general on the highway is like the worst thing. I remember on my 125cc whenever I had to ride far and when I had to ride on the highway, it was the worst thing ever. You know, on a 2-stroke the throttle is in general either fully on or fully off. So when I rode on the highway I was like on the highest RPMs and every little movement on my hand was like I got pulled forward and backward, and it was, well, not fun at all. So if you were planning on riding on the highway often, or if you have to ride further to get to your stunt spots or something like that, a 4-stroke is so much better. Another con about the 2-stroke is that there's a lot more maintenance than on a 4-stroke. Another con of a 2-stroke is mixing gas. The newer models of the 2-strokes usually have oil injection. Sometimes that oil injection breaks and your piston seizes. And that's a really big problem with the TPI 300cc's or 250s, that the oil injection breaks, so your bike just dies. And some people even take away their own oil injection on their bikes and just mix in the tank. But mixing in the tank is really annoying. You don't really feel free then, because you always have to think about having oil with you. Yeah, it also gets really messy. You have to like mix gas at the gas station, but I mean sometimes it's worth it. Okay, now so let's move on to the pros of the 450. The first thing that we're gonna talk about is piston changes. On a 450 4-stroke, you can change your piston all the way from after 20 hours to 250 hours. It really depends on how you're riding your bike. Some people go up to even 300 hours without changing piston on a 4-stroke, but yeah, that's a little bit risky. But if you're lucky and if you don't ride full throttle all the time, it works. But on a 300cc 2-stroke, you have to change your piston from around 50 to, well, 150 hours. It really depends on how you ride. Next pro about the 4-stroke is basically the reason why I bought this bike, is that they are reliable. 4-stroke bikes are just so much more reliable than 2-stroke bikes. The engine basically never ceases, and I have ridden this bike for 68 hours and I haven't had any issue with this at all, except for me crashing and breaking stuff, but I mean that doesn't count, that's just me being stupid. Anyways, so 4-strokes are so much reliable, and that's why I bought this bike, because last season my 125 engine seized and I had to spend the whole summer just rebuilding the bike. But this bike really holds up and doesn't really break, so that is so nice. Another pro about the 4-stroke is that you don't need to bring 2-stroke oil with you. You can just go to the gas station, fuel up the bike and then be on your way. And it's such a nice feeling. You feel so free when you don't have to bring 2-stroke oil with you. Another pro with the 4-stroke is that they are so pleasant on the highway. With the right gearing, you can cruise on the highway at like 100 kilometers per hour without any issues. It's not as nice as having, for example, a sport bike riding on the highway, but it's a lot better than a 2-stroke. Now, the next subject of the pros of the 4-stroke may be from person to person. The biggest difference between a 2-stroke 300cc and a 4-stroke 450 is basically just the engine braking. Other than that, they are pretty much the same bike, except that the 2-stroke 300cc is a lot more snappy. If you compare a 250 2-stroke to a 300cc 2-stroke, the 300cc has a lot more bottom end power than the 250. That means that the 300cc 2-stroke is basically a 450 without the engine braking. And the engine braking is really from person to person. I'm still in that grey area where I don't know if I like the engine braking or not. Sometimes when you're doing wheelies, it's really nice with engine braking, because you can go behind the balance point without using your rear brake and just coasting through the air. And you also don't have to think about pulling in the clutch whenever you're letting go of the throttle. But recently, when I've tried that 300cc 2-stroke, I've started to feel that especially stunting without the engine braking is a lot more nicer, because you feel like you have more control of the bike, because the bike doesn't brake for you. And especially if you're a beginner rider, I believe that a 4-stroke is a lot better, because whenever you're letting go of the throttle, the engine braking acts like a rear brake for you, which can save you quite often. But when you get more advanced in wheelies, for me example, that the engine braking is just in the way, it's super annoying, and it can also lead to your bike stalling. And that's one thing that has happened to me. I was in too high of a gear and my bike is stalled, and when a 4-stroke bike stalls, the rear wheel just locks up and I flew forward over my handlebar. So if I had a 2-stroke during that scrape, I would not have crashed my bike. So the engine braking is really from person to person. I guess that if you're used to it, you like it more, and if you're not used to it, you dislike it. It's really from person to person. Okay, now, so let's move on to the cons of the 450. First con is that if the engine seizes and the engine brakes, you are cooked. If you aren't like a trained mechanic, or if you have a lot of experience with engines, it's gonna be a really expensive failure on your bike. Fixing a 2-stroke engine isn't that expensive. If the piston seizes, you basically just need a new cylinder and a piston. Sometimes you have to take the engine apart to get some piston chatter out of the engine, but if a 4-stroke engine breaks, you're man, it's not fun at all. But then there is the pro that they usually never break. Okay, so now we've talked about the pros and cons of both the bikes, but now we're gonna talk about which bike is the best for you, depending on what is your riding style. So let's begin. Okay, now, which of the bike is the best? It really comes down to what type of rider you are. If you are a more casual rider that are just basically cruising around, and if you don't really know much about engines or maintenance, a 4-stroke is definitely the bike for you. You will have a lot more of a smoother ride, you will have that smooth power output, not so much maintenance on the bike. But if you want a more snappy ride with a lot of acceleration and power, a 2-stroke is definitely the best for you. I still do not know if I should buy a 300cc and sell this bike, but for now I'm gonna use this bike. Because as I've talked about before, I'm still in that grey area where I'm still used to 2-strokes more than 4-strokes, but I'm started to get used to 2-strokes. And yeah, it's really annoying. Here is my old school. So yeah, I guess before you know which bike you're gonna have to buy, I really suggest trying both the bikes, because they are really different to ride. But as I said before, the only thing that you should think about is that if you want engine braking or not. If you want the engine braking and the reliability, go for a 4-stroke. But if you want a more snappy ride and without the engine braking, go for a 2-stroke. Alright, so I really hope you learned something new of this video, and if you're planning to buy a brand new SUPERMOTO, I might have helped you finding the right bike for you. But I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.